I've always wanted to write scary stories since I was younger, and although I think I am and have always been a very decent writer, I've never really been much of an idea guy. It's hard to think up new scary stories, especially so when there are so many ideas and things that have already been done to death. I wanted to come up with a new idea, and not just the same thing over and over again. There's a lot of rural area around where I live, and I guess that's one of the things that inspired me to be a horror writer. The woods and even the fields can be a really scary place where you can come up with all sorts of terrifying happenings. It also gets a lot darker out in that area than it does in urban areas. I know that mostly because I live in a more urban area at the moment. Anyway, on with the story. This happened in the fall. I was still in high school at the time. That was the time when I was writing the most stories, and I guess that was why I was running out of inspiration. I was a bit underwhelmed by the beginning of the school year that year. I wasn't having a challenging time, so I was looking for something to really get my mind going. Of course, I thought that writing a scary story would be just the thing to do. The only problem was that I was having a really hard time thinking of an idea. About the third week of school, I realized I was fully blocked, so I decided to go for a walk at night. Sometimes something as simple as just going on a walk is a really good way to get new ideas and inspiration for stories. So I went out for a long one. I lived on a country road myself, but I wasn't that far away from a small town. There were some neighborhoods around as well. I walked down the road in the dark, just trying to get my mind to come up with something. I walked on down off the gravel road, and actually made it to the paved road. I figured ideas were not coming to me yet, so I might as well keep going for as long as I could. I walked into a neighborhood that a friend of mine lived in. I wasn't intending on going over to his house, but I was familiar with the area, so I could walk up and down the streets and I wouldn't have to worry about getting lost. Right on the edge of that neighborhood were these really small patch of woods, and there were also some houses around. I want to try and explain this as well as possible so you can understand and visualize what the area looked like. The woods were on the right side of the street that I was walking on. On the left side were houses that were facing the road that bordered the neighborhood that I was walking in. There was another line of houses that were facing away from that direction, so these two rows of houses had their backyards facing each other. Now, there was an old paved road that ran behind and through both rows of houses. There were a lot of trees lined up and down both sides of the street, plus there were no street lamps, and there was rarely any light from the moon either. It got very, very dark back there. I debated whether or not I wanted to try going on a walk through that area. I had walked through it before with my buddy, but I had never done it by myself at nighttime. Still, I told myself that it would be a good idea, because maybe I would get a little bit scared, and maybe being scared would be enough to jog my inspiration for a scary story. I wasn't feeling particularly scared that night though, and I doubted deliberately trying to make myself scared was going to be inspiring. However, there were some houses there that had some outside dogs. I wouldn't see them, and I thought at the very least I might get a good jump scare. I decided to go through with it. When I first started walking down the street, I could still see the leaves that were falling off the trees behind the two houses. But as I walked just a little bit further, it gradually became almost completely pitch black. I'm sure most of you have watched some horror movies. One of the things that we do when we watch those movies is brace ourselves for possible jump scares, and that's exactly what I was doing. I was tensed up, just waiting for it to happen. As I kept walking, I didn't hear any noise other than the crunching of my own feet on the dead leaves on the ground. It was quiet, and I got tenser and tenser. I kept expecting the bark, but began getting apprehensive in expectation of it too. Even though I'd been hoping for a jump scare, I began to really not want it to happen. I think you all know that sort of feeling that I'm trying to describe to you. Suddenly, there was a sound. Nothing but a low, grumbling sound. Sort of like when a dog talks back to its owner, like he's mumbling under his breath. And that was it. I stopped walking. It was still dark, so I couldn't see the dog or much of anything, but I did look over in the direction that I'd heard the dog make the sound. "Really?" I asked the dog. "That's the scariest sound you can make?" "Well, when you strangle a dog, he can't bark at someone walking by." I heard a voice from the direction of the dog whisper to me. I experienced something much different than a jump scare just right then. It was something I hadn't experienced before, and haven't since either. It was a wave of fear moving through my entire body. It was cold dread. That's the only thing in the world I can think of that could describe it. My legs reacted much quicker than my mind did, though. They picked up and began hauling butt down the street. The only thing I was thinking of was that I had to get to the end of this road and back into the light as quickly as possible, so I ran and ran, almost tripped several times. I didn't quit running until I got underneath a street lamp. At that point, I turned around and looked. I didn't see anyone coming after me. All I noticed was the trees covering the road and the leaves that were steadily falling from them. As before, it was now completely silent outside. I turned and began to go home. It took a while, but eventually I calmed down. Now, I didn't get completely calm until I arrived home, and even then I was still a bit on edge. But I guess I got what I was looking for. The funny thing is, this happened years in the past. I've written many stories and things since then, but never put this story down until just now. I never really enjoyed my visits to my relatives' houses after I was a teenager and then an adult. The reason behind this is that when I was a teenager and the oldest of my cousins, who were mostly quite a bit younger than I was still treated like I was one of those younger kids. The last thing I wanted to do when I was 16 years old was go out and play with kids around the age of 11. This continued well into my late teens and early 20s. My grandma, aunts, and uncles would hang out, and because I wasn't married, they still acted like I was one of the younger kids. They would insist that I go outside and play with the young ones. I stopped visiting for a few years because I was tired of just always being treated like that. It wasn't until my late 20s that I decided to go and visit again. And when I did, it was when my mom went to visit, so I accompanied her down there. I had one uncle who I didn't see a lot while I was growing up. He would travel around looking for work or people to live with, along with his longtime girlfriend at the time. He was my Uncle Bill, and I always enjoyed being around with him when I was younger. He wasn't as tightly wound as all my other relatives. Of course, this meant that he often did a lot of drinking and also a lot of drugs. He got fired from a lot of jobs, and even spent some time in jail. That, of course, made it harder for him to get good jobs going forward, so he would often work under-the-table jobs. Well, on this visit, a lot of my relatives were over at my grandma's house. Fortunately, because they had missed seeing me, my relatives were not treating me like a kid anymore. Another one of my uncles wanted to take me over to his house and drink some whiskey with him, but his wife didn't really want that going on, so that didn't happen. But my Uncle Bill lived in his little shack out in the hills. He lived there for free with his wife, a different one than the one I was used to growing up, that was provided to him by a guy he did farm work for. He asked me if I wanted to come over and have a beer with him. His wife liked those flavored drinks like Smirnoff Twisters and things like that. I had never had a beer before, and I almost declined, but she told me I could share her drinks with her, so I went. I had a few of those drinks. I also had a beer for the first time in my life, and my uncle had also had some weed to smoke. I had done that before, but I didn't exactly tell him that. He was happy I had my first beer with him, so I had no problem having him think I would have my first joint with him too. It was a really nice afternoon that moved on into the evening. I was having a nice time, but also, all of the drinking and weed had really begun having an effect on me now. I was beginning to get drowsy, feeling like I might pass out or fall asleep. When I woke up, it was to what sounded like a gunshot and an ear-shattering scream. I was still out of it. It took me a few moments to figure out where I even was. When I did, I noticed that I was in the small shack by myself with my uncle's wife. My uncle was not in the building, but I could hear him shouting something at someone. Getting up, I went to look out the window. She tried to stop me, but I was too curious. The little shack was up in the hills on a dirt road. It was right on the edge of an orchard. It was an odd setup, because I had never seen an orchard out in the hills like that, although it was beautiful. That was what my uncle did work on, and he was standing there at the edge of the orchard. That's when I saw lights coming from the orchard. There were a couple of them, and I figured they had to be flashlights or something. When I saw them, I heard another gunshot. I realized then that the gunshots had been fired by my uncle. The lights retreated for a moment, and then they shut out. When my uncle came back, I noticed he was bleeding severely. His wife helped him out, and my uncle explained to me what had happened. Apparently, while I had passed out, the guys that had worked on the orchard and previously lived in the shack came by to harass him for taking their job. They had been kicked out by the owner of the orchard and had been occasionally tormenting my uncle and his wife. The shack didn't have any door on it, and they had gotten in, threatened my uncle and his wife while I was passed out, and in the heat of the argument, had stabbed my uncle with a knife. The relatives generally always had a rifle or a shotgun in the house, so my uncle retrieved it and chased the men out into the orchard. Despite the guys leaving, I felt very uncomfortable the rest of the time I was in the shack. It was scary in the dark, in the hills, to be in a shack with no door on it, in the edge of a dense orchard, knowing that the people who had attacked him could come back at any time in the protection of the dark. We weren't there for very long, though, before my other uncle showed up. He had heard the shots and came to see what was going on. They took me back to my grandma's and my uncle to the hospital. The next time I visited, my uncle was not working in the orchard nor living in the shack anymore. I never found out what happened with the two people who had attacked him. I've only had one really scary experience in my life, and to this day I still can't really explain it. I'll wait until the end of the story to tell you why, however, since I don't want to give away spoilers too soon. When I was 16 years old, my family was going down south to visit some other family. I didn't exactly want to go, for many reasons. Mostly because I knew that if my family were away, my dad would leave the keys for the spare car, and then I could go and drive it around without any fear of getting caught. We lived in a beautiful area out in the country. We were only there for a couple of years, and it was so long ago. I haven't lived in a place like that ever since. Ours was in a hilly area. You had to drive out of town through the rolling hills, into the higher hills to get to where we lived on, and although you could look down on a lot of the lower hills in front, not so much so into the higher hills behind or around us. Anyway, my family was out of town, and I decided to go driving around. I went into town, picked up a few friends. We did a few things together and hung out a bit into the night. However, my buddies had to get home, and they all lived in town, so I decided to drive back out to my area. Well, my last friend I took home lived a bit out of town. I dropped him off last and then decided to head on my way home. However, rather than driving back to town and then through the rolling hills, I thought I would take the back way around. I had never been in that area, and I thought my sense of direction would help me out. Although I didn't think I was lost, I ended up driving into the higher hilly area for quite a bit. I had learned to drive on roads like this, so I was used to doing it. It was dark, and the road was narrow, and although I had driven on these sorts of roads to learn, I hadn't done so in the middle of the night. The darkness was the scariest part of the whole thing. While I was going downhill, what I thought was the scariest thing possible happened. The car died, and when it did, it continued coasting down the hill, all the way to the bottom of it. I tried starting it, but I realized that the battery was low. It was not uncommon for that to happen with this car, so I decided to just let it rest for a while before I tried again. It was a scary thing just sitting in that dead car. I locked the doors, which seemed silly too. It wasn't like I was in a dangerous urban area in the city where someone was going to break into my car or something. There were not a lot of houses out in this area, and people who did live out here were generally pretty well-to-do people. I still was at an age, though, where I could occasionally be afraid of the dark, and I did let it get to me a little bit. Maybe about 40 minutes after I had stalled, I noticed some lights from behind me. A car or truck pulled over to the top of the hill, the one I had just rolled down. The light from the headlights shone all over me, but rather than come all the way down the hill, the car stopped at it. The light just shone on me. I couldn't figure out why exactly, except if I was possibly blocking the way on the very narrow road. Rather than just remaining at the top of the hill, though, I thought they would at least come down and ask me what was wrong. Maybe they would be able to give me a jump. But rather than do anything like that, the car just remained sitting at the top of the hill, the light shining down on me. After about 10 minutes, I was beginning to get very worked up. It seemed like it was an extremely weird situation. I was about to try and start the car again, when I heard a door slam. I thought maybe the driver was finally coming down to check on me, but after a few moments, I noticed someone standing in the light of the vehicle. Rather than walk down to see me, he just stood there illuminated in the light. The fear kept building up over and over. The situation was getting weirder and weirder. Finally, I noticed the guy begin slowly walking down the hill. However, I suddenly didn't really want him to. The situation was way too freaky by this point. It was then that I heard a revving noise. It seemed familiar, but I was not sure what it was when I first heard it. After a few revs, though, the motor started. The silhouette of the man then took on a much more ominous shape. The man was holding a chainsaw, and he was slowly walking towards me. I paused for just a moment. The moment didn't last long, as I decided to try and drive the car for the first time. I'll spare you the horror movie cliché, though. The car started on the first try, and when it did, I blasted off down the gravel road as quickly as I could. I drove really fast, and didn't slow down until I got to our driveway. When I got out of the car, I looked down our long driveway and down the hill. I did not see a car or truck coming in my direction. I went into my house and remained there for the night. I have no idea who that had been in the car with the chainsaw. I had no reason to believe it was anyone I knew, or anyone who had anything against me either. I mean, it's possible it was just some crazy motherfucker who was going to hurt me for blocking the road. It could have been a guy who was just trying to scare me for the sake of scaring me. Well, mission accomplished if so. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you guys liked the video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. That sort of stuff really helps me out with the audience engagement and really helps my videos get out to a lot more people. So hopefully we can get to that 1 million one day. Help me out, guys. That'd be great. Once again, starting this week on the second channel, we're going to be doing some true crime stuff, probably twice a week if I feel in the mood for it, and feel like doing all the research required. Those will be on Wednesdays/Thursdays and Saturdays/Sundays probably. So look forward to that if you're interested. There's a link to my second channel in the description. The name is Mr. Blue Sky, so keep an eye out for that. If you guys feel like contacting me for any reason, links to all of my social media will be in the description below, including my Facebook, Twitter, and Gmail accounts. Send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get back to you as quickly as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please make sure that it has proper grammar, and try to include as much detail as possible so it's long enough for me to include in a video. Also, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is, if it has one, what type of story it is, if it has a theme, and how you would like to be credited in the description of the video the story appears in. If you guys are curious about the art used in this video, links to my artist, Alan, will be in the description below. He does a lot of horror art stuff, and he's really good at it. He also does commissions, so if you guys have any projects you want to work on or something, please be sure to check him out. He can probably get you something really good. As usual, links to the music used in the video will be in the description below in the order which it appears. I think that's pretty much all for now, guys, so thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.